Welcome to Unit 3, and in this unit, you'll learn everything you need to know for cellular energetics.
Photosynthesis and respiration. If we compare these two processes, so photosynthesis captures the light energy. It reduces carbon dioxide into carbohydrates. If I'm reducing something, it means I am adding electrons to carbon dioxide to make carbohydrates. It will release oxygen from the water molecule that's being broken down, and it happens in chloroplasts and or photosynthetic prokaryotes. So yeah, the output is oxygen and carbohydrates. Now for respiration, we use that oxygen and carbohydrates to release the energy from these organic molecules. So if I have a glucose molecule, these are the chemical bonds. And these chemical bonds store chemical energy. So we are going to be breaking those bonds in various steps to release the energy slowly to get that stored chemical energy and ultimately to make ATP. Now, when I break this bond, it will release the electrons, so we need the electron carriers that will carry it to the electron transport chain, and then via chemiosmosis, we'll make ATP. Now, electron transport chains is a shared theme among organisms, and it shows that we have common ancestry. So we create this electron transport chain in the thylakoid membrane for photosynthesis. In the inner mitochondrial membrane, we do it for cellular respiration, but also prokaryotes can use their plasma membrane to create an electron transport chain. And they all work in a similar way. So electrons would move through the electron transport chain from one of these complexes to the other. As the electrons are moving, it creates a proton gradient. And then we have ATP synthase that uses this proton gradient to create ATP. So for the big summary map, okay, enzymes control reaction rates and they lower the activation energy, they speed up reactions, okay, and they can be used over and over and over because they without being consumed, meaning it doesn't form parts of the reaction. So if I have the reactants and this is the chemical reaction and this is the product, it doesn't form part of that. It is here on top of this arrow because it just speeds up that reaction. Okay, and it can be used over and over and over again. ATP couples energy releasing and energy requiring processes. So if ATP to ADP is a very exergonic reaction. So that means it releases a lot of energy. And ADP, and I'm adding a phosphate, that is endorgonic. Now we can use this exergonic reaction to drive other endorgonic reactions or reactions that require energy. How we ultimately start making ATP starts all the way in photosynthesis, where we use light energy and we store that light energy in carbohydrates. Okay, so we use carbon dioxide and water to ultimately make carbohydrates and oxygen. Now we use these products in respiration. So in respiration, we release the energy, the stored chemical energy from carbohydrates to make ATP. Now, the carbohydrates are broken down to carbon dioxide and water, and we use that energy as ATP. Now, electron transport chains, chemiosmosis connect photosynthesis and respiration. So in both photosynthesis and respiration, we use electron transport chains where we have a proton gradient that's forming. And in ATP synthase uses that gradient to drive this reaction of turning ADP back into ATP. So the key reaction, the key takeaway is that we use light energy and we transform that light energy into chemical energy. This chemical energy is what we find within the chemical bonds of the carbohydrate that's been formed, or this biological molecule. Now, one of the byproducts of creating this carbohydrate is the release of oxygen, because water would be split to release the hydrogen ions or the protons, and it will also create oxygen, whereas carbon dioxide will be incorporated within carbohydrates. Now, both photosynthesis and also cellular respiration have electron transport chains and chemiosmosis. So the electron transport chain creates a proton gradient, and this proton gradient is used by ATP synthase to create ATP. Now, the carbohydrates that were made in photosynthesis and the oxygen are now used in cellular respiration. Oxygen becomes the final electron acceptor to form water. And when we break down carbohydrates, we break it back into carbon dioxide. Okay. And we use that energy that has been stored within these chemical bonds to create ATP via the electron transport chain and chemiosmosis. And then ultimately, carbon dioxide and water would be returned to chloroplasts. Okay, we would breathe it out, and it would ultimately be returned to plants and to make carbohydrates and release oxygen. So, and then this whole process happens over and over and over again. So, thank you so much for Unit 3, and I'll see you in the next unit. And then finally, this is your exit task, and this is just to see if you fully understand what the main objective of the lesson was. So here, a plant captures light energy. Okay, so here is the light energy being captured and stores some of that energy in carbohydrates. So this light energy is transformed into carbohydrates. An animal, okay, in this case, a human, eats the plant and uses cellular respiration to transfer the energy from carbohydrates. So here, the carbohydrates, that energy is being transferred to make ATP. Now, the question is, explain why it's more accurate to say that energy is transferred and transformed and not created. Okay, so energy is not created because energy cannot be created or destroyed. Okay, it can only change form. So one type of energy can only be transformed into another. In photosynthesis, energy is transferred from light to chemical energy. Okay, and this chemical energy comes from the carbohydrates. In those chemical bonds that keeps these molecules together, we store that chemical energy in those chemical bonds. Now, during cellular respiration, the energy is transferred from these organic molecules. You remember, organic molecules store that chemical energy in the chemical bonds, and it transfers that energy to ATP. Okay, and then some energy is released as heat because energy transfer is not 100% efficient. Okay, there's always some energy that is kind of lost out of the system, and that energy is not destroyed, it just doesn't stay in the system. Okay, so some of that energy is released as heat. And that is a very big overview of Unit 3. And I would encourage you to work through all the videos. And if you have any questions, please post, ask. I will be more than willing to answer. Okay, see you. If you like that lesson, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you for the next one.